and welcome to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. The AIDS biz fighting a deadly virus, or the endless funding of big pharma? How much consensus is there within the scientific community? How much dissent? Does confronting the AIDS epidemic need a complete rethink? To discuss the world's largest medical problem, I'm joined by Dennis Brun in Vienna. He's the United Nations AIDS Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia. In Meinheim, we have Peter Duesberg, a professor of molecular and cell biology at the University of California, Berkeley. And in New Haven, we go to Steve Ketterer. He's the president of Global Pharma Insights. And another member of our CrossTalk team, Yelena Hunger. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Denise, I'd like to go to you first in Vienna. You're at this International AIDS Conference. It's the 18th. Fundraising is an issue. I seriously doubt awareness has to be an issue, at least in the modernized, industrialized world. Everyone knows about this epidemic. So what do you hope to achieve at this conference? It looks like at this point it's the conference of low expectations because of the recession.
Well, I wouldn't say that completely. First, there is a level of awareness which is very low in some parts of the region, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. We find that among young people, sometimes more than half do not know how HIV is transmitted, do not know how to prevent it, how to protect themselves. We also have other types of expectations at this conference, is to share some of the new things on science. You know, today it was announced that the clinical trials of a new gel, including tenofovir, was protective for women to a pretty large extent. So there are new things coming up. We know also that keeping more than 5 million people on treatment is going to be a challenge because new money is not coming up.
Okay, if we can go to Mannheim, to Professor Duesberg, what do you think about this process going on in Vienna? It's the 18th conference on AIDS. Also, the issue of raising billions and billions of dollars to fight this epidemic. What do you think about what's going on in Vienna right now?
I do think it's a problem, but the problem is actually much less so than it's commonly advertised. The reason is that AIDS, the AIDS virus, when it was first discovered in 1984, it was thought to be a new pathogenic virus that would cause a general epidemic decimating people in the United States first, where it was first presumably discovered, and then in the rest of the world. It would be a fatal epidemic like the flu, the Spanish flu in 1918, where millions died, or the polio epidemics in the 50s and 60s, where thousands and thousands died in the Western world. And the vaccine was promised right away to be available 2 years later. But what happened now in the last 26 years is much, much better than predicted. It was, in fact, there is no epidemic. And people don't want to admit to this after they predicted so many times it would happen. There is none. There is no epidemic in the Western world. Hardly anybody ever got AIDS, only 2 or 3 risk groups, male homosexuals and intravenous drug users. There was no epidemic in Europe, none in Asia, none in South America. They mentioned still there may be something coming in Africa, but even that seems to be flawed. So we have actually some good news here. We have no general epidemic. There is no mass death in the Western world for sure. And unfortunately, well, we don't have a vaccine, but we don't need a vaccine if we don't have a virus that would cause a pathogenic or a flawed or an epidemic.
Okay, if I can go to New Haven here. Steve, the professor paints this as not being such a big catastrophe as we hear all the time in media. A lot of people actually call this the AIDS industry. There's enormous amounts of money put into advocacy, awareness, and I would agree with you in Russia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, awareness needs to be heightened, but still at the same time in the industrialized West, as the professor pointed out, a lot of people do know about it. I mean, for big pharma, as it's called, I mean, this is an important industry for them fighting this virus, isn't it?
Well, you know, AIDS is part of the portfolio of any drug company that's manufacturing drugs. It's usually a very small part. There are companies like Gilead, which is definitely the leader these days, where AIDS drugs are the majority of what they do. But if you look at any other AIDS drug manufacturer, HIV is actually a very small piece of their business. So I think that the AIDS drug companies look at this as definitely an opportunity for profit. This is a capitalist society. They have to make money. They have to cover their R&D expenses. They have to be able to produce new HIV drugs, and they do that by making money on the drugs that they have already produced. But they also look at it as a social issue. And I think that with the exception of one or two companies, which I personally choose not to work with anymore, the AIDS drug companies have done a very nice job of trying to understand this market, get out there, identify challenges where they can make a difference, and direct funding so that they can be helpful. I think that these are huge problems. They are not problems that any one drug company's budget can cover. But in the clients that I work with, and my job, just so everyone knows, is basically to represent the voice of people with HIV, as well as healthcare providers, whether those are doctors, PAs, nurses, to the drug company, so that the drug company knows firsthand what the needs are, what the opinions are, how they can introduce better versions of the drugs they've already got, create new drugs that are easier to take,
but
have
Dennis,
fewer side effects.
I agree with you, but Big Pharma's really had a bad rap over the last few years. Maybe the last 2 or 3 years it's gotten its act together, at least as a public relations point of view, because a lot of people are saying just making huge amounts of money off of it. I'd like to go back to Big Pharma a little bit later, but I'd like to go to Denise here. At the United Nations and other advocates that you have come across in Vienna, are they satisfied with the participation and the work that Big Pharma has done in dealing with this virus? Because, like I said, over the last, except for maybe the last 2 years, the Big Pharma had a very black name when it came to dealing with this virus.
Well, it's difficult to say that. I mean, you have all the inventions for HIV have been developed by Big Pharma. They have come up from a whole set of different laboratories, public, private, but Big Pharma has been developing them, getting them to patients. And these drugs, when they fell out of patent, have been taken by generic manufacturers who are very important suppliers for the treatment of people around the world. So there is kind of a partnership. It may not be always an open and brotherly partnership, but it's there between the community fighting HIV and the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
And thank God that they are doing these drugs.
Okay, if I go to the professor in Mannheim. Professor, do you think that... what is your opinion of Big Pharma in dealing with this, fighting this virus? I mean, a lot of critics and a lot of people that would be critical of you also say that this is just a huge money bag. I mean, the pharmaceutical business is a $350 billion business a year. It's growing 10%. I mean, in an environment like this, it's doing pretty well. I mean, what do you think of their role in fighting AIDS?
I mean, from the point of view of AIDS research or AIDS science, this is a big disaster, because the drugs are all aimed at inhibiting a virus, the so-called AIDS virus, which doesn't do anything. It is not pathogenic. There are 40 million people on this planet, according to the WHO, who have HIV. Most of them don't even know about it. They're completely healthy. A third of the African population is estimated to be positive. The African population has doubled, I'm saying, from 400 to 800 millions in the last 25 years since they are infected by this virus. Or 25%, whatever you want. But the WHO has overly advertised they are all infected and they're all going to die. The reality is they have doubled. And they carry the virus that doesn't do any harm. And the companies try to treat the virus that doesn't do anything with drugs that are inevitably toxic. Okay. The drugs were developed, the ACT was developed 40 years ago for one purpose, to kill human cells for cancer chemotherapy. And the result is they have never ever cured one AIDS patient. They even say that.
Okay, Dennis in Vienna, you disagreed with that.
Yes, of course. I mean, we have 2 million people die of HIV infection every year, and these are not people who die of old age. I can tell you that. The average age of people who die in Russia is 32 years. This is preposterous. I mean, the antiretrovirals are keeping people alive, and people are staying alive thanks to administration of these products. And we have now 5 million people on antiretrovirals, and it's thanks to that mortality has decreased so much that people live a normal life.
All right, Professor, would you like to reply to that? He strongly disagrees with you on that. He strongly disagrees with you on that.